Uh, I'm going to limit myself to the reception of Yemeni works in Ethiopia during the 18th to the 20th century. The importance of Yemen in the training of Ethiopian scholars has always been emphasized. It is taken for granted. It's almost mythical. And the Islam in the Horn of Africa ERC project allows us to really clarify the circulation of texts in this area. We benefit from the facilities of a database. Moreover, the project goes beyond Harar and includes Muslim communities in regions of Ethiopia whose circulating literature has been little explored. It leads to a re-evaluation of local production, the presence of text in Ajami, by example, and to a better estimation of the assimilation of works to discuss the Yemeni contribution with other contributions. For this reason, even if the database includes manuscripts from Ethiopia preserved in European and North American institutions, we have tried to select manuscripts linked to a locality. We mainly find Yemeni authors in the devotional and mystical literature and in legal matters. These are the subjects which much the most interested Ethiopian scholars. Sufi brotherhoods have been a vehicle for Islamization in several regions among the Oromo and in the Wello in the 19th and 20th century. In my review of the titles in circulation, I made a distinction between devotional poetry and mysticism, but in practice, like teaching and Maulids, we cannot separate them. Devotional, so this is a quick map so that you can see that the region we will talk about is Harar and Oromio and a bit Hamar. So devotional literature such as prayers and poetry make up the larger part of local collections in Ethiopia. In anthologies of poems authored by local ulama, poets from Yemen appear together with poets from Egypt, Sudan, and very well-known authors like El-Buthiri, already mentioned by Alessandro. Prints from Egypt, Bombay, and scholarly links to the Arabian Peninsula gave them access to a wider library. Under certain titles, it is often difficult to define a corpus. I mean by that a stable collection of texts organized in a stable manner. The material culture of Harar, so you have some pieces of it on your screen, reflects the practice of Maulids of circulating folios among those present. Indeed, the absence of binding or the late sewing of folios to a block cover for collections of devotional texts is noticeable. Let us start with devotional texts by Yemeni authors in Ethiopian collections. So you have here the very well-known Abu Bakr al-Adani, founder of the Brotherhood al-Aidarusiya, and he is born in Tarim, Hadramaut. An example of one of his piece of poetry in one of these collections. Then you have devotional text by al-Bur'i al-Yemeni, So you can see the list is quite long, 13 poems, and is from Jebel Bora in the Tihama region, so not so far from Zabid. Again, an example of his one of his poems in a collection, quite carefully copied. Then you have devotional texts by other kinds, other examples. So you have a book by Ahmad ibn Ulwan, who is was born close to in a small village close to Taez, and also a surprising piece by famous historian al-Daybai al-Zabidi, and authors who remain to be identified like this one because of his nisba, which are difficult to comment. So now we have even more interestingly poems and comments on pieces which are originally by Yemenites, like this tahmis, which is a tahmis of a qasida by Ibn al-Ahdal, very Zabidi name. And you have this other one, which is a commentary of Hindi from Zabid again. And here is another example by El Bouaiti. So commentary of Yemeni book by the very well-known Bafadl el-Hadrami. All these piece of devotional poems, comments, etc., are present in the Oromo region and in Harar. So as for the mysticism, this example, which is an abridgment of a book by Yemeni scholar El-Yafi'i, and we will return to him later. So as for pieces in fiqh, Yemen, together with Egypt, was a major source of the Ethiopian fiqh. The Hanafi school is attested in Sunni regions of Yemen. I'm not sure it is always connected with the Ottomans, which were not continuously present in the country, but in 2 installments. But I'm not going to solve this question today anyway. There are Hanafi in Zabid to this day. The 19th century saw a revival of the Shafi'iyya in Ethiopia with printed books from Egypt, like items from Bulaq Press, pervading even in remote localities, I mean, not close to a road, and with Sufi Da'i working on the Islamization of the country. As a consequence, the Hanafi school remains the major one only in some areas of northeastern Ethiopia. Among the Ethiopian scholars who made their way to Yemen to study Islamic law with Shafi'i masters and returned to Ethiopia is El-Hajj Dahoud on your screen. And he came to study in Yemen. He returned to Ethiopia. There are indeed scholars who never returned and settled in Yemen. One I met in the 2000s was Alim al-Allama in Zabid, considered to be one of the highest ranked Alim in the town. Now back to Al-Hajj Dawood, he was instrumental in the spread of the Shafi'iyya to various other locations in the region around in the Oromo region and around the center. He created when he returned to Ethiopia in Wello. The prominence of the Shafi'iyya is clearly attested in the manuscript collections in Ethiopia, and most often there are commentaries, glosses of renowned Shafi'i works. During the second half of the 19th century, and especially in the 20th century, the Tijaniya played an important role in the Islamization of Oromo regions, spreading Malikite contents. This is a line of doctrinal circulation that's come from West Africa. Yet, according to the collected texts, the canon is formed by the works of the Shafi'iyya, for instance, Fath al-Mu'in of al-Malibari, not easy to pronounce, to which we will return, or the very famous Mukhtasar Abi Shuja'. Among the most widely dispersed works, we have المقدمة الحضرمية في فقه السادة الشافعية, composed by the Yemeni scholar Bafadl al-Hadrami. It was disseminated through two commentaries to his work, abundantly copied in Ethiopia. Grammar is picture of it. Grammar is also represented by the commentary that Yemeni authors have made on important and well-known works. The grammar is part of the Adawat ad-Din, so the instruments for the tools for studying the Quran. So we have commentaries of Mulhat al-I'rab, very famous book, and Lamiyat al-Af'al, of course, unavoidable. Finally, I wanted to finish this review of Yemeni subject that inspired Ethiopian scholars with magic. There is two interesting examples I collected. So there is this IES manuscript, holograph of Mandal al-Sulaymani, of which I found copies in Sana'a and the surroundings. It is about Solomonic magic, very popular even in Christian Ethiopian magic. Mandal is a word which may well be of Indian origin. So I've selected this other folios for you because this is the core of the mandal. This is a part of the exorcism using a mandal. So it's a book of exorcism, and this is the end of this part on exorcism. And then I noticed also this Harari manuscript. Discovered in 2018 of a text called in the Zaidi Island Daira al-Falakiyya, associated with the living practice which uses al-Daira to diagnose the kind of sickness which affects the visitor who requests an indication from the sheikh. So this is not the picture of the manuscript found in Ara. I couldn't find it because it is a single folio in all my documentation. So I replaced it by a daira that I found in Sana'a. So the unusual content of these two texts helped to connect them to Yemen, and particularly to the Yemeni islands. Also, the case of magic as well as Sufism remind us that an important part of the transmission of knowledge is done orally, as previously said by Alessandro. And I will complete my talk with the question of the scholarly network. So let me come back to the case of the Indian scholar al-Mali Bari and al-Yafi'i, and add others. They raised the issue of the scholarly network which could interact with the Ethiopian scholars. Al-Mali Bari was very popular in the sunny part of Yemen too, where we found numerous copies of his works in Al-Ahkaf and in Tarim. So it is possible that it is how he was brought to the attention of Ethiopian scholars. In this matter, an additional and interesting document is the Manuscript French National Library, Arab, etc. You have the reference, Bifolio, collected first in Ethiopia by the mission Dakar Djibouti, conducted by the anthropologist Marcel Griol, and edited and published. It gives access to the content of teaching library of the Mosque Addis Alam in Gondar in 1932, that is to say, a very Christian area. The list of titles was written by Griol's informant, Shah Muhammad Tayeb, who is saying from himself from Min Addis Alam. So the books listed here are therefore part of the classical baggage of a student in a madrasa or learning under a sheikh. This echoed the important Sufi brotherhoods and major Sunni schools in Abyssinia. Almost all of them are represented outside the Gondar Mosque in other libraries in the Horn of Africa, and some are used in teaching elsewhere in the Arab world. In the library of the student Alim, so pretending to be, is again al-Yafi and Ahmad ibn Idris and Sheikh Awad, etc. al-Hindi, Hindi in fact in the document. Al-Yafi is a Sufi who acquired a broad regional dimension on both sides of the Red Sea, but whose Yemeni origin seems to be alive in the oral tradition in Ethiopia. Ahmed ibn Idris is also a Sufi whose dimension is regional and extends to both sides of the Red Sea. He is not, however, known by the same works in Yemen and Gondar. The case of Sheikh Awad is potentially very interesting to illustrate the issue of the movement of people over the area of the Indian Ocean. And I will very quickly go more into detail about these three authors. Al-Yafi was born at the end of the 7th, 13th century in Yemen. He studied in Aden. Then in 1319 AD, he moved to Mecca and spent almost all his life between the Haramain. A member of the Qadiriyya, he founded a branch of it, the Yafi'iyya, still alive in Yemen. His best-known works are Rawd al-Rayahin fi Hikayat al-Salihin, which has gone through many printings, of which an abridged form is present in the Oromo region, and Nashr al-Mahasin al-Ghaliya Tifad el-Mashahir el-Shafiya, which is also present in the Oromo region. It contains a defense of Sufism comparable to El-Suyuti's effort, as well as edifying stories of saints that serve as a support for elements of mystical doctrine. From his time, El-Yafi'i enjoyed notoriety extending as far as Cairo and Jerusalem, but no doubt that thanks to El-Suyuti, who often quotes him, the road was much used by later authors who wrote hagiographies of saints or stories about them. In the catalogue of Dar el-Martutat, as you can see from your screen, there are more titles. So the purpose of this slide is to show that you don't have always the same books available here and there. The famous Moroccan-born Sufi Ahmed ibn Idris, who belonged to the Idrisid dynasty, was a reformer of the Qadiriya Brotherhood and founder of the Qadiriya Idrisiya branch. Is another regional reference shared on both sides of the Red Sea. One of his descendants, Muhammad ibn Ali al-Idrisi, founded in 1910 the Idrisid Emirate of the Tihama region of Asir, annexed in 1934 by the Saudi Arabians. An anti-Wahhabi, Ahmed ibn Idris is a well-known and living figure in Yemeni Tihama through the text of Hassan ibn Ahmad Akish al-Damadi, the Munazarat Ahmed ibn Idris al-Maghribi, etc. Ma ulama Asir al-Wahhabiyya, a book which interested people of Bergen. On the side of the Ethiopian mountains, it is, as in a large number of Muslim countries, through his activity as a teacher in Mecca, where a teaching chair ensured him considerable influence with students from everywhere, that he is known, something which is reflected in the title of his Al-Iqd al-Nafis fi Nazm Jawahir al-Tadris, so present in Gondar and Oromo. The Sheikh Awad, my last slide, author of the Mukhtarat al-Sair, has not yet been identified. Nevertheless, the absence of alat al-ta'rif in the text of the Griol collection, so is called Hindi, not el-Hindi, seems to indicate an Indian origin, recorded by the informant of Griol as the author of a prayer book, otherwise unattested in the Islam in the Horn of Africa database. It is likely that he came to study in the Horn of Africa, perhaps by way of Yemen, and may have only subsequently gained notoriety in and around Gondar. The Mukhtarat al-Sair was collected in 1932, so it is possible that its author visited at some point in the 19th or 20th century. Seen from this religious teaching library, the connections with Yemen are therefore sparse and rather indirect. The connections are broader, referring to many parts of the Arab world in general. Only one manuscript, that of El-Yafi, mentions relationship to Yemen, without wishing to underestimate the exchanges between Sufis on both sides of the Red Sea, I mean lively real tides, travels, etc. They are more indicative of a relative integration of Ethiopian Muslims into a wider community of shared knowledge, stretching from North Africa to the Red Sea, going through Mecca as well. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the to the attendees.